Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. Today, I'm very excited to get an opportunity to interview Emily Cameron, a music executive who's right now with ATC Management. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you've had such an illustrious career. I want to take you back. I want to get to where you are now, of course, but now you're more advanced. Let's go back and talk a little bit about the early days. So what first drew you to the music industry?
Well, I originally actually wanted to be a musician when I was growing up. I mean, I kind of always, it sounds cheesy, but I always knew it was music, kind of right from the minute I could talk. I was kind of singing before then and always had felt very, very connected to music, obsessed with music. I didn't care about any other subject in school, apart from kind of, like drama or writing, which basically had to do with music anyway. And I started playing the piano when I was 5 years old. And then I played the violin, started learning 2 years afterwards. So I did that. And then I also sang. I was trained classically and went to musical theatre school. But I felt very much that as much as I loved music, I really didn't want to be singing on a cruise ship or anything when I was 40 years old. And I also felt that I kind of wanted to explore the business of music more before I kind of ultimately decided that would be what I would go into. But I didn't have any family in the music industry or kind of anyone to help me get my foot in the door. And I was about 18 years old. I just finished high school, was very into sports, and I was training kickboxing and boxing and training up for a fight in the gym right next door to Sony Music Publishing. And I'd been frantically applying for internships everywhere. Everywhere I could send my CV, anywhere I could find an email online, I would send it. And obviously I was no more than just, a name on a screen, and they had millions of those coming in every day. And the man who ran Sony Music Publishing at the time for North America and Europe was based out of the London office and used to train martial arts in the exact same gym. So someone said to me one day, they need an intern. And it just so happened that it was exactly the time that I was looking for an internship. So I began my internship, but never had any intention of leaving. So I made a lot of tea for 3 months and kind of just made myself as indispensable as possible. And stayed there for 2 years, and that was how I got started.
What was the thing that impressed you most when you first started your internship? I mean, because walking into Sony Music, is not exactly a mom and pop shop, right? So what was the thing that struck you the most when you first got there?
I think it was I learned so much about the creation of a song. So I'd always known that there was record labels and artists and managers, but I didn't have any knowledge or understanding of the business behind making a record and the people who make those songs. So for instance, the first day that I was interning, I had to bring up and make tea for Nile Rodgers, which was and still to this day he's one of my, all-time favorite musicians. And I think that what kind of took me aback the most was just kind of how many incredible songwriters, producers there are, and people that, in the general public, you just don't even know about, but they're responsible for so many of our favorite songs over the years.
Now, eventually you decide to leave and move on. So what happens what prompts the next move in your life?
Well, I was constantly bringing up songwriters, producers. When I was interning, I was bringing them up all the time for meetings, and I would always kind of have the opportunity to chat to them. And then I moved into an A&R role where I was kind of a bit more hands-on with the roster, but still was communicating with them on a daily basis. And it it wasn't lost on me how frustrated a lot of them were. And having grown up doing music, I felt kind of very connected to a lot of their struggles. I kind of felt in many ways like, these are a lot of the kids that I went to school with who, we would do shows together and stuff. And, a lot of the things about the music industry and that I started to learn about songwriting and streaming and, how producers and songwriters get paid these days basically just really stood out to me how much was wrong with the industry. And I felt that, despite being able to be helpful somewhat from a publisher side, I was one of, thousands and thousands of employees who could only do so much. And I think the role of management is it's definitely much more demanding. I think it's high risk, high reward, but I felt that I would be able to be a lot more hands-on with everyone and anyone that I worked with by being their manager, because I could kind of be there for them, not just to emotionally support, which is a really big part of the role, but also really kind of get into the weeds of, demanding songwriting fees and master points for songwriters and stuff like that. So they were all things that I became aware of and wanted to kind of change a bit more directly.
Sure. Well, now one of the things that attracted me to you is that, you're very much part of the process of protecting artists. And I think that's an important thing. I mean, obviously we have the strikes going on right now, with the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild. And that's really all about protecting people who create, right? And are trying to earn a living from creating. So for you, what does the creative process look like? I mean, because it's not just about creating the song, as you indicate. Music industry is somewhat like the film industry or the television industry. They're very collaborative. There's many hands in the wheel before you get to the final product. Right. So there's we say there's the writer who puts the character on paper, and then there's the actor who breathes life into the paper character, and then the cinematographer kind of weaves you through the visual story. So what's the creative process look like for you in your world, and what the music your artists are creating now?
I mean, I think that it's always, what's interesting about it is that every song is different, every day is different, but very, very rarely is a song ever made from an artist going into one session, working with a producer and a songwriter, and coming out at the end of the day with a finished record. I mean, that it just doesn't happen. Sometimes, but more often than not, it is a very long process of, you could have songs that have been sitting on a hard drive, for a year or 2 years before someone hears them, and I think especially these days, we've got such a plethora of music coming out constantly. It's so easy to release music, and not that many people really know, how to make a hit go viral, or, how to make something go off on TikTok. And a lot of, record labels are just trying to replicate the success of songs that have just kind of on a fluke taken off on the internet. I mean, I think the thing that I love the most about it is that it really can come anyway. I think the thing that shocks me the most about it is how difficult it is for great music to get through to artists. There's a lot of politics involved, I mean, I think my approach has always been to deal with the creators, even if it's not the songwriters or the producers, I mean, I send songs to engineers pretty often, or mixers, to get a song through the line and get a song heard directly. Because, often the A&R might not always be super involved with the project. They might have come in to sign it, but the artist, is very much in their bubble. So yeah.
And does it help that, I mean, you actually were in A&R for a while, right? So does it help that you fill that role? You kind of have wore a lot of hats along the way to this point.
Yes. Yeah, I think that you've got to think in, you've got to be able to put yourself in absolutely everyone's shoes, and kind of think really about what motivates every single person behind the record, to get on that record, because ultimately you have a lot of gatekeepers, especially these days, so even if you've got the song to the artist, you still then have to deal with, someone at the record label who's like, I actually had a personal issue with the person who wrote this song. They went on a date with my ex-girlfriend one time 5 years ago. So I don't think this should make the cut. I think I'm going to encourage everyone to keep this off the record. I mean, you never really know kind of what you're dealing with, but I think having been an A&R, having an understanding of really the artist and who they like to work with, I think has been the most important thing for me. And I was in a meeting the other day with a label publisher, a label A&R, and he'd said to me, I forget that you were a publisher, but you're a manager who kind of acts like a publisher. And I think when I think about the majority of songs that I've got cut or had success with for clients of mine, it's always been from having that publishing background, having the knowledge of, okay, well, as a good A&R, I have to know all the people that are across this project. I have to know the artist's favorite writers, the mixing engineer, the production engineer, the vocal engineer, all these people, who are a part of the record, all have a say and an influence in what ultimately comes out. So, yeah.
You did a little bit of work on the Black Eyed Peas album, right?
Yeah,
Weren't you a little involved with that?
Right up there.
What was that like? I mean, that had to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting process because it was done all throughout COVID. So I was involved by Johnny Goldstein, who is a producer from Israel, who I was managing at the time, and he is a very close collaborator of will.i.am. They still work very closely together. I was obviously a huge fan of the Black Eyed Peas growing up, and had all their albums. So that was really exciting to kind of hear things, but become, from a sample to a full track, and then this artist gets on, and then another artist gets on, and the translation album in particular had so many different incredible artists involved on it. I mean, especially in the Latin world, I mean, you have Maluma and, Nicki Jam, but then Shakira, and, then you have artists like Tiger on there. I mean, it was really kind of exciting timing, but also very interesting because we were in the middle of COVID and no one could do actual recording sessions. So will.i.am and Johnny actually did, Johnny did 12 out of 13 productions on the album with Will, and every single one of them he did on FaceTime from Israel. So he was actually in Israel, and he used to work on Los Angeles time, or whatever time zone will.i.am was on. They would connect and basically FaceTime and go back and forth over notes and make tweaks together, send stuff back and forth. It would then be sent to this artist and that person, and whoever was in, whatever city, and they could come in and record, they would. The Shakira one in particular, Girl Like Me, was a very interesting one because I believe those vocals were actually from a session that was done in 2004. And Will, I guess, just, pulled them up and was like, hey, I have these vocals, how about we do something with this? And it was that same top line that you hear today, but just kind of repurposed, and it's super interesting, I think, how technology has allowed us to do that. I mean, I think even despite the fact that we were in the middle of a global pandemic, to be able to put out such a successful album, and be able to have the producer and everyone work on it remotely, was really amazing. Because I just moved to America and I was thinking, oh gosh, like, I've just moved to Los Angeles, and, I was so excited to get stuck into this process, and how is it going to work, but I think ultimately it's it's a good message. You know, I think great music and collaboration will always, you know, always shine through no matter what the situation is in the world. So
Is there ever an element of that you feel like I have to pinch myself for this reality? Like you said, you went your whole life uh enjoying or being a fan of the Black Eyed Peas, and like suddenly you're working on on a project with them. Like, is there a moment you're like, I'm kind of living my dream?
every day, to
Yeah.
be honest with you, every day I kind of feel like it's not, especially living in Los Angeles, I think you kind of feel like, oh my gosh, is this kind of really real? And I think it's important to keep that as well, because I think the minute that you kind of become, not
Jaded or
unaffected by it, yeah, but exactly jaded by it, I think it's easy to also, that there is another side of the music industry that is, makes you feel slightly less bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, because there is a lot of politics that goes to it. So I think it's important to keep that pinch me element, because that's what keeps us all going, really.
you had a recent client, the and I can't remember which one it was because you have so many, but one of them just went to like 1 billion streams, did they not?
Yes, Dakota. So Dakota, she and Jonas Blue did a song, which was a remake of the iconic Tracy Chapman Fast Car. And yeah, it recently hit 1 billion streams on Spotify, which is one of very few songs to do so. So that was a real moment. And it's funny when stuff like that happens, especially nowadays, because, I think obviously even getting to 1 million streams is hard. So 1 billion streams is kind of another level. And I think it's easy to forget, I think, in the age of streaming as well, because what does that really mean, but to get to 1 billion is something that is, I think, because so few songs have done it. I know Spotify actually have a playlist, I think, that they kind of update of the ones that have done 1 billion streams, and I think it's only about 30 or 35 songs long. And yeah, I mean, that was a real moment. I think it's amazing to see the journey of a song, because that song obviously came out a number of years ago, and the fact that people are still listening to it and still streaming it. And it's funny, so many people kind of came up to me after that and said, oh my God, I spent years with all my friends, like as a teenager, dancing to that record, and that's incredible. And it actually kind of really reignited a lot of the artist side of music for Dakota, because we kind of about a year ago had met and started working together. And she had been an artist and been signed to her major label deal, and was kind of getting much more focused on writing for other people. And she actually grew up in Spain, which no one knows, so she's been doing a lot in the Latin world. And then all of a sudden, it's funny, it's almost like dating, I think, a lot of the time in music. The minute you're like, oh no, I'm not available, and I think I just don't want to do this anymore, something amazing happens, or someone comes along, and all of a sudden you're kind of swept off your feet. And that exact thing happened with the Fast Car record. We kind of really decided that we were going to put a focus on writing on different projects, working for other people, because she's an incredible songwriter as well. And then that song kind of came back around, and everyone started reaching out again, and now we're kind of back doing features and back doing more in the dance world, which has obviously had a huge resurge. So yeah, that was exciting.
Do you know right away when you hear something like, yeah, this is it, this is the magic?
I definitely do. I think sometimes the hardest part is, really, and I think the hardest part of the industry for me, and getting my head around the industry, particularly in America, has been when you get a record or hear an artist and you're like, this is the real deal. This is, an artist or a musician who's going to stand the test of time. They're incredibly talented, and this is kind of undeniable, an undeniable hit, or the music is, you can't not hear this. And I think probably the most difficult thing about being in the industry these days and being a manager is knowing that you've got something special, but it's not just about that. I think nowadays it is so much of a data game. And so I think the hardest part is knowing that you've got something special and, reaching out to, whichever A&R your contact is, or, someone at a streaming service, or, whatever it might be, and kind of getting, oh, but it's too early, it hasn't broken yet, or it hasn't kind of blown up yet on TikTok, and you're kind of thinking, well, isn't that your job as an A&R to kind of sign something and put money behind it? I mean, a good example is at a meeting with a friend at a streaming service recently, and he was telling me that there was an artist that they were really excited about who is signed to another very big artist. So she's been collaborating with this very successful artist. So she already has a lot of co-signs in the kind of A-list artist world, and is kind of signed to a major publisher, is an incredible songwriter. She's already got a pretty large following online across social media and all her platforms. And, they were supporting it as a streaming service and, playlisting a few things. And he'd sent it to one of his friends who works at a major label. And she just kind of, I think without even listening to the music, replied and said, "This is too early for us." So I think that's if that's any indicator of how tough things are for artists right now in the industry, that's it. I mean, I think unfortunately, it's not just about having a great record. It's about really, you have to break yourself nowadays. It's that role of artist development has fallen upon the artist manager and the artist.
Well, that's the truth, right? That's probably the biggest change in your industry, I would think, just as an outside observer. All right, when I was young, I mean, somebody would get signed to a record company, and then yeah, you started seeing them all the time, and it was more about the record companies discovering artists. And now with YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, there's clips, and now with all of social media out there, artists can just create a song, go on, start performing and posting their stuff, and get a following. And it truly is, if you don't go in with the numbers already in place, that you've honed in on that, no one is looking. And now they want like built-in audiences.
Yeah, they do. And the tricky thing with that too is, on the one hand, you can kind of understand it happens a lot. We deal with this particularly a lot in dance music. So a lot of writers and producers that I've worked with will have songs that get cut by big DJs, and a lot of the time what DJs will do is they'll test the song in their set. So they'll kind of be like, all right, let's see how the crowd does with this one, and if they like it. And on the one hand, that's a fantastic way of testing the song in real time. On the other hand, what happens a lot is you'll have everyone who's involved in said record write an incredible song. It's obviously very, very hard for songwriters in particular to earn money these days, but hey, this big DJ wants it. Great, there's a few other people interested, but we're going to give it to this guy because that's the person that will, as you said, breathe the most air into it, and just really allow it to take off. They have the biggest following, it'll do the most numbers, and then they play the song out a bunch of times, or they start teasing it on TikTok and then never have any intention of releasing it because it doesn't do what they think it does on the particular TikTok that they've posted. And it might have nothing to do with the record, but what it then means is you've spent all this time working on this song that can never be released by anyone else because now said DJ has kind of played it out or claimed it. And so it definitely gets complicated. It's a kind of, you have to have eyes almost in the back of your head for stuff like that. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
And I think it's important too that artists do at least consult with managers and the like to try to get somebody representing them or guiding them, right? It's a rough industry to try to get into on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that for me, that's the number one thing that is kind of almost missing. I think a lot of the time that there's a huge gap between artists and songwriters and producers and the kind of level of support that they get. Not from all artists, but I think from a lot of artists. You mentioned the SAG-AFTRA strikes earlier. One thing I find fascinating about that is that, all of the actors and actresses are also involved in everything as well. The reason that it's getting so much press is because you've got people like, you've got the Oppenheimer cast walking out of screenings and premieres and, showing support in such a way. Also, they're able to unionize. Musicians are unable to unionize. So that also is very, very unhelpful, but it never ceases to amaze me the lack of communication that there often is between the artists and the songwriters and producers. I think it serves the industry, and it certainly serves the labels very well to keep them kind of very, at a wide berth. And you obviously have writers and producers who become extremely close collaborators of artists, and you have the Max Martins of our time, and those kind of really top level kind of songwriters and producers that all the top artists are going to for kind of advice. But I think unfortunately it doesn't happen so often that the artist is the one doing the mentoring. I think you have a lot of producers or songwriters who become very successful that might start publishing ventures, or that kind of take younger songwriters, producers, artists under their wing. But I think that artists are also so actively encouraged to kind of be very much their own entities. It kind of really surprises me the lack of artists that get involved in stuff like the songwriter and producer fights, and them getting points on records, or songwriters getting fees, or you don't hear Taylor Swift or anyone making any noise about that. So I think that there's definitely a lack of knowledge on the artist side about songwriters and producers, and the struggles that they face. I have friends that go and work with major artists who can barely even afford their Uber to get to the session, but that yet they're showing up to someone's mansion, and recording and scraping pennies together to be able to get home. It is really, it's unfortunate, I think, the lack of that there is in the industry. But hopefully, I know a lot of people are talking about, with the SAG-AFTRA strikes and everything that's happening collaboratively across there, that it will kind of prompt some shift in the industry, but we do need to be able to unionize first.
Right. And again, I think that one of the important things is that artists do try to find people like you, right? It's not so easy to get managers like you. To be honest, here at the upper end, but still, to try to make an effort to seek managers, because that is a good, as you put it, bridge into the field, like to get somebody with the savvy and the know-how, who can be your tour guide through that process. So I think that's an important message to get out there, at least to try to make an effort to talk to a manager, consult with a manager, or certainly try to get a manager excited about you, maybe who'd be willing to take you on as a first step, as opposed to the other way around, like trying to break in yourself, or do things yourself, or sign things yourself, right, without. So can you tell me what you're excited about now? What's the project you're working on that you're most excited about right now?
Oh, it's hard. It's like picking a favorite child.
Yeah.
It's like picking a favorite child that I love them all for different reasons and in their own ways. I'm most imminently, I have an artist called Dizzy Faye, who we are about to kind of start launching her kind of, she's independent artist from Minnesota, We just did a sold out show at the iconic First Ave in Minnesota, in St. Paul, out in the end of June. She was the first artist that I ever took on, actually. So I'd always been very kind of set post-publishing that I would just work on writers and producers, because artist management is a whole different beast, and it involves, not just the musical side, but it also, press, fashion, video shoots. I mean, there's a whole host of other, tours, travel, things that go along with it. Dizzy Faye and I met through a mutual friend who's a producer, and he said, listen, I have this artist and she's incredible. I want you to meet her. I think you're really going to get on. Can I bring her to an event you're doing? And I said, sure. And she came, and I was kind of absolutely mesmerized by her and really like, wow, this is a star. And she really had that kind of star quality. And then we went for breakfast, really connected, and she played me a song over breakfast that I just was kind of like, okay, well, I have to do this, and this is like the secret sauce. This is incredible. So we've been working together for just over a year, really building, kind of making sure, obviously recording sessions and pairing artists with producers and songwriters is something that, I'm very passionate about, and I think is really, really important, because those are the people that, you're going to continue to collaborate with for the rest of your career. And if you're going to have a long, illustrious career, then you need a lot of great songs to back it up. So she's an incredible songwriter as well. And we are about to start releasing her project the end of September. So we're going to rolling out. It's going to be called Once Upon a Dizzy Faye. She's really incredible. I mean, it's kind of, I guess, reference wise, a mix of like, very Janet Jackson. There's a lot of Prince influence in there. She's obviously from Minnesota, but on a more modern tip, Doja Cat, people like Aaliyah. I mean, she's a kind of real mix of like R&B, soul, pop, R&B, soul, pop. So that's exciting, because that's the first ever artist that I took on. So very, very excited for that. And also just for, it's always exciting knowing you're putting out great music, and what it could potentially do and how it could change people's lives.
What's your favorite area of music? Like, what do you listen to when you're just at home, with your feet up on the couch?
I go through phases, to be honest with you. I go through phases for sure. I would say my favorite, I'm a 90s baby, so I'm a real sucker for the 90s R&B and hip hop. I would say is pretty up there. My parents used to play a lot of jazz. I love jazz. I think that's definitely something that I find very calming to listen to. But yeah, I mean, all the great early noughties stuff too, in terms of kind of R&B and hip hop, I'm a big fan of. Never Say No to the Spice Girls either. It's really kind of, it's a big mix, but I would say a very heavy kind of 90s influence for sure.
Very eclectic mix there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to, I mean, I love pop music. I used to do classical music and musical theater. So, I mean, I think you have to ultimately, I mean, I guess that's the thing. What is popular music? I mean, pop music is whatever is the most popular thing at the time. And I also think that we very much work in fashion, we kind of work in cycles with music,
Right.
I mean, right now, for example, there is a huge kind of resurgence of like late 90s, early noughties pop kind of R&B influence that's coming back. And I feel like every kind of 20 years or so, we have that, I mean, I think we've had a rough few years. So I think everyone's feeling a bit nostalgic for, simpler times, those are definitely my favorites. But I'm also British. I'm very partial to a bit of house music when it's the right mode. But yeah, I'm a sucker for good melodies and lyrics. So yeah.
So advice to artists. What advice would you give to the young, 16-year-old who's sitting out there listening, trying to start their career, has talent? What advice do you give that person?
Find your best collaborators. Find your best collaborators, stick with them, be very consistent with writing songs and making music. I mean, if the second that you have a great song, go and write another one. You could never do too much time honing your songwriting, production, creative skills. That is so important, because ultimately, you're always going to be dealing with, the label wanting more from you when you're eventually signed and putting out music. And a lot of the time you're going to be told no again and again and again. And so to have that consistency and drive where you're like, what, this song didn't do what I hoped it would, but I'm going to go and write another one, and then that one's going to hit, is super important. I mean, I think a lot of people these days forget how difficult it is for an artist to break and how long it actually takes. I mean, I think, like an example that I love is, Dua Lipa, who's obviously one of the biggest pop artists in the world right now. She re-released her first single in the UK, and this is when she was signed to a major label. I think they re-released it at least 3 times, over the course, of about 2 years. Just because something doesn't work immediately doesn't mean that it's not going to go, and it doesn't mean that it's not going to go in a big way. So, that being said, I would also say, don't take no for an answer. Keep going. That is, for the 99 A&Rs and people at labels that will tell you no, there will be someone who champions you. And I think, most, if not all, major music artists now, even your Scissors, your Billie Eilish, whoever it is, all have stories about working with labels and things not working out. And I think that consistency is key. So I would say, find your team, find your collaborators. If you can, and it might be your best friend from school, but if you can, find a manager who supports you. I think the number one thing in a manager, it's someone who's loyal to you and someone who will fight for you, because ultimately that's the most important thing. I mean, I think that the deeper you get into the industry, it's the same 50 guys and a few women, not enough just yet, but it's the same people that are doing the same deals across the table. It's the same lawyers, the same A&R guys, the same few songwriters and producers, and the same managers, kind of the same business managers. It's all those people at the top that kind of keep, the music industry is huge. And then you have a core of it that's kind of the gatekeepers, I guess you could say. And, no matter who you are and no matter what song you've written, you're always going to be coming up, against these people. So the most important thing in a manager is having a manager who will be loyal to you. A lot of managers and companies have setups, and one of the reasons I joined ATC is because of the way that they operate as a business. It's very much kind of artist first and art first, and work hard and be nice to people, whereas I think a lot of the time management companies are very driven on numbers. Same thing with labels too. I mean, they're driven on numbers. They're sitting every week in meetings where they're getting told, hey, oh, your artist only did this many streams, sorry, go and find another one. So it's often you're dealing, and your manager might be dealing with, your A&R might be dealing with other people above them who are giving them a hard time, and so you want someone that's going to fight for you in all aspects.
And where can people learn about you?
Where can people learn about me? You can find me on Instagram. We have an ATC Management, which is just at ATC Management handle. My personal one is the number 1 and then Emily Gracie. So you can find me on there. I'm not on Twitter or anything like that. But yeah, if anyone reaches out to me on on Instagram, then I'm always happy to share email and, you know, listen to songs and so on. So yeah, I believe my email's on there's a kind of industry site called Roster. I think my email is on there as well. So yeah.
That's excellent. So I know we've run out of time, but this has been a really fascinating interview. I want to thank you for joining me today. And I hope you'll come back and keep talking to me as new artists come your way and as you're creating new exciting paths.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, and we're going to sign off and say thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube or listening for any place else you get the podcast, and have a great day.